Hi. So I was prepping for today's class and I got overwhelmed in watching video after video after video of Elder Vern Harper. So what I did was I got in my car and I thought I'll try to give this lecture in my car because I'm reminded of Vern, Elder Vern Harper, because I used to drive him places and drive to the camp with him, and so here I am in the car and I'm going to talk about Vern Harper. So we are now covering content in the southern door, and when I think about the southern door I think about we just got out of the eastern door where we talked about Indigenous identity, those Indigenous peoples from Turtle Island north of the colonial border, and going into the south I'm reminded of action and youth and movement, and that's why I wanted to focus on what I'm calling We Were Never Idle. And where that came from was from actually Elder Vern Harper, because when Idle No More came about, he remarked right away, we were never idle. And I hope by the end of this course, and especially after the end of today, or today if you're watching this on Tuesday, or the end of the Southern Door content, you'll recognize that Indigenous people have been involved in activism for time immemorial. So I wanted to talk about Vern. Vern was a well-known activist on Turtle Island, really, and he was a medicine man, and he was a veteran. He was a father, a grandfather. He was a grandfather to very many, and his family, his daughters and his sons were very open to sharing their father with community. So I first met Vern about 20 years ago when I went to a program at Council Fire, and he was facilitating that program. A lot of what Vern did in his life was connected to community, but community on the streets. Not necessarily coming in and talking to people in the university context, but when I would be driving him around, a lot of times we would see someone who seemed to be down on their luck, and he'd say, hey, pull over, and he asked me if I have any money, and we would give people money. One time we were crossing a bridge in I guess Scarborough area, and there was a young native girl, and she was just contemplating on the bridge, so he had me stop, and he ended up talking to her. He was worried that she was going to commit suicide, jump off the bridge. So Vern impacted many people's lives. He saved many people's lives, and a lot of people loved him, but there were a lot of people who were very mean to Vern, including some folks at Ryerson University. When I first started working there at Ryerson, you bring in people, elders, traditional people, to do different events, and he was blocked. Some people blocked. So if I was involved in any activities with certain other folks, they would not want Vern. And it was really telling when he passed away, just the two-facedness of people, talking about Vern like they knew him and like they respected him, but there's some people who were quite mean. So yeah, the first time I got to know Vern was at a program out at Council Fire at Parliament and Dundas, and that was also fitting because I grew up in Regent Park, as you know, and actually Vern was born in Regent Park in the 1930s. So he talks about being born during the Depression, and his mom died when he was 4 years old, and he was put into foster care. So he talks about the foster care system in conjunction with residential school, because he didn't go to residential school, but he was put into the foster care system and abused pretty badly in foster care. And he talked about foster care, just some people doing it just for money, and to this day there's people who do foster care simply for the money. You get more money when you foster a child as opposed to if you're doing kinship care or if you're going to adopt a child. so yeah, he was an amazing person, and we went to South Korea, and I was part of I did martial arts, and we went to South Korea to demonstrate Okichita, which is an indigenous martial art that Master George Lapine has brought in, really looking at the warrior system of the Plains Cree, and Vern was the elder associated with that program, so he came to South Korea with us. And I remember on the bus ride from Seoul to Cheongju, which is about 2 hours north, near the North Korean border, and he was just like looking out the window, and he was having, memories of the Korean War and his time there, and it was not obviously a good time. He lost a cousin. He shared that story with me one morning when I was braiding his hair, and he cried, and he had other memories that came flooding to him as a result of going to South Korea. But there was also a positive aspect where a lot of the veterans found out Vern was there, and the people who were our guides and our translators there told some of the vets, and the vets came to meet him and took us out to dinner and bought him gifts, and took us out to karaoke, and they also tried to find the location where Vern's cousin was buried, sorry, I always say buried, that's a native thing, and we ended up finding a site where there was a mound with a lot of people who had been killed in the Korean War. So we went back a bit later at nighttime and did a ceremony there. Vern and myself. I think it was just Vern and I, because I had to climb the tree. Yeah, he was a phenomenal man, and he used to talk about his activism, but not using the term activism. He talked about dissidents, and talked about how government did not like that term, but that's kind of who he was. He's the one who first told me about CSIS, the Canadian Spy or Intelligence Agency, following Indigenous people. So we're labeled as terrorists, and they're concerned about our whereabouts at times and what we're doing. Vern was part of the American Indian movement, and back in the 60s, he went to Alcatraz. He helped start with his then wife Pauline Shirt Wandering Spirit Survival School. So after Alcatraz and being involved in the American Indian movement, started a school in the 70s in Toronto that is still there. My nephew was attending that school last year. They had changed the name a little bit later to First Nations School because of politics, and after Vern passed away in May 2018, they brought the name back, Wandering Spirit, which is named after a warrior. So yeah, Vern was also a warrior. He was on my PhD committee. He was the elder associated with the martial arts program, as I said, and he whenever I had a question, I would go to him. I didn't go to my committee members, I didn't go to my supervisor. So when it came time for my defense, I wanted Vern to be a voting member on my committee, and I mentioned it to my supervisor at that time, and they said no, that's not possible. So I did a bit of research, and I found a policy at the University of Toronto, that would allow someone with a particular expertise that didn't have a PhD to sit on a committee as a voting member. So I worked with First Nations House, and got that done, and then I went to the faculty and I said, okay, wouldn't it be great if you can be the first faculty to do this, right? Have an elder, a traditional knowledge holder, as a voting member on a PhD committee. And they had to agree at that point because there were too many other external units at the university who were involved in trying to make it happen. So yeah, he came to my defense. He asked me questions, but mostly everybody focused on him, which is a good distraction for me for my PhD. I miss Vern terribly. He passed away while I was in Winnipeg, and came back for his funeral. But when we were in Winnipeg, when someone passes away in Anishinaabe culture and many other cultures, Cree culture, you light a sacred fire for 4 days so they journey well into that spirit world. And I was in Winnipeg, and I was asking, like, where's the fire? Because Vern would always, go to sacred fires, start sacred fires for people when they passed away, and nobody was starting anything for Vern. So I got his other Shkabewis, so Shkabewis is helper, but I got his other helper to start a fire at Native Canadian Center. And I emailed the executive director because they were saying, well, we can't have a fire overnight. Well, when you have a sacred fire, you have to have the sacred fire burned straight for 4 days and 4 nights. So we ended up putting up a camp there. I came in from Winnipeg, and the camp was going outside of the Native Canadian Center with the fire. And we had that fire until his ceremony, which was more than 4 days, because you want to wait until they're buried. And yeah, we had that sacred fire for him, so people in community, the people who he worked with, the street people, could come and sit and drum and sleep and eat. And there were many donations from community. There were medicines that were brought in. People would bring in medicines, and we had that ceremony for him to honor him and honor the work that he did for many, many, many decades in Toronto and across Turtle Island. And at his funeral, it was unbelievable. It was at the cemetery there in Scarborough, and it was at the funeral home in the largest room, and there was a steady flow of people. Duke Redbird was doing the emceeing, I guess, for lack of a better word, and people came up and spoke, and steady stream entirely. So some people who didn't get to sit down, they would come in and walk by his coffin and leave, and that continued for, it must have been a good 2 hours, and still not everybody got to walk in front of his coffin. And we had our drums, so we asked all the people to bring their drums, the women to bring their drums, and we drummed for him. And as they took his body out, as they took the coffin out, we sang the Unity Song, which is also known as the American Indian Movement Song, or the AIM Song, or sometimes the Leonard Peltier Song, which is a bit controversial. We can talk about that a bit later. And we sang that song walking behind while they carried, did they carry his coffin? I think they carried it. And it was hot. It was May, but it was a hot day. And we sang until we got to the gravesite. And there were people there from all walks of life, which really demonstrated the uniqueness of Elder Vern Harper. He could connect to street people. He helped street people. He could connect to politicians. Even though, he was followed by CSIS, there was CSIS folks there to honor him as well. And there's a motorcycle group there, and they revved their engines, and as they revved their engines, then Master Lupin was standing across, and he motioned for me to look up, and I look up, and he had planes fly overhead to honor him. And you know how they have that missing plane, so they had the missing plane to be symbolic of Vern. And yeah, it was unbelievable, the impact he had. So today, when I tried to prepare for the class, I just couldn't. I wasn't as close to Vern after I moved to Winnipeg. Obviously, I wasn't seeing him, and I miss him dearly, and I just hope you can look at some videos about him, read about him, and you obviously read the Native People's Caravan, the 1974 march from Vancouver to Ottawa, and just the impact he had in our communities and on the next generation. My grandnephew calls Vern his grandfather. He says, no, he's my grandfather. He's adamant about that, so he'd be walking around Wandering Spirit in the school and saying, yep, that's my grandpa. And Pauline Shirt, his second wife, still works at Wandering Spirit, and yeah, he had 3 partners throughout his life. His first wife died. I think he saw 2 or 3 of his own children go to the spirit world, which was really difficult for him. And he had 5 children, I think, with his second wife. One of the children from his first wife is an RCMP officer, and with his last wife, he had a young girl, Cody, and Cody is probably 35. She was actually pregnant at Vern's funeral, which was nice to see that next generation coming in. There's a teaching about that. So I guess I'll cut it short there, and you know, I really hope that what you get from this course is recognized. There were many, many, many people like Vern Harper, Essen, very many people like Essen. Anyways, I'm going to stop my video now, and hopefully it's turned out okay. I tried to videotape a few times in here, and it's a bit rumbly, but I'll see you Tuesday. Take care.